Good morning. I hope everybody's doing great. I don't know about you guys, but I'm getting excited. I'm anxious. I can hardly wait to get back to church. I can hardly wait to see you and listen to our pastors preaching and sing together. I just miss it so much. But today we're going to finish the eyewitness accounts. Those people that saw Jesus after he'd been raised from the dead. And just a real quick reminder. Remember, Mary Magdalene was the first one to see him. She didn't touch him, but she got to see him. And then remember that Mary, the mother of James, and Salome, and other women, we don't know how many, they got to see him too and talk with him. I don't know if they touched him or not, but we know that they saw him. So now remember, that's a group that has seen him. And then remember the two men on the road to Emmaus that talked to him the whole way, and on that way, he taught them from the Bible. And their hearts burned, but they didn't realize because God had closed their eyes until they ate with him in the town of Emmaus. And Cleopas and the other man were amazed because they realized when Jesus broke the bread, it's him. Jesus Christ is risen from the dead. And then remember the 10 disciples in that upper room where the door was locked and they were afraid. Jesus just appeared through the walls. And they realize he is the Son of God. He's raised from the dead. He is totally human like us, but he is totally God. And remember, they watched him eat. He had boiled fish and honeycomb. And he gave them his peace because of their fear. And remember that Thomas wasn't with them. And then 8 days later, Thomas got to see him. Remember, Thomas was rather bold and said, I won't believe till I put my hands in his side and in those nail holes. And Thomas got to do that. And Thomas, remember, then his heart was totally changed. And he said, my Lord and my God. And so then we know that the disciples went back to Galilee, and some of them went back to their jobs. And 5 of them went fishing that night with Peter. And they didn't catch anything, and they come back to shore, remember, and the man on the shore says, throw your nets on the right side. And they caught all those fish. And then Jesus is the man on the shore. We all knew that. And remember, he cooked them breakfast. Yeah, wonderful fresh fish that he had made and some of their fish. And we think there was probably bread involved too, but we don't know for sure. And then after breakfast, this is where our story continues. Jesus takes Peter aside. Jesus wanted to talk to Peter just by himself. And Jesus says to Peter, Peter, do you love me more than these? And he was talking about the fish, but not really the fish. He's talking about fishing, and he's asking Peter, do you love me more than your job of fishing? Because Jesus had a new job for Peter. And he wanted Peter to say and be bold about his commitment to Jesus. So Peter's answer is, yes, Lord, you know I do. And then Jesus says, feed my lambs. Well, we know Jesus wasn't a shepherd, and he didn't own sheep, so what are the lambs he's talking about? Jesus is saying to Peter, feed my children. Give my children food from the Bible, spiritual food. Teach them about me. And so then Jesus says a second time, 2 times now, Simon, do you love me? And Peter says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus is looking at Peter's heart. Do you really love me? So then he says, tend my sheep. He doesn't call them lambs like little children. Now he calls them sheep. Those people that follow Jesus, he wants Peter to tend to them, to take care of them, to spend time with them, to talk to them, to teach them, to be their leader, to love them. And so now, the 3rd time, Jesus is going to ask Peter, Simon Peter, do you love me? Peter's a little frustrated and confused and perplexed at this time, and so he says, Lord, calls him Lord, you know all things. Peter's saying, Lord, you are God. You know I love you. Jesus says, feed my sheep. He's saying, Peter, I have a new job for you, not being a fisherman, but being a leader to my followers, teaching them, loving them, feeding them all the words that I've spoken to you. And does anybody know why Jesus did this 3 times? Do you remember what Peter did before Jesus was crucified? He denied him. 3 different times that night. In the dark, Peter said, oh, I don't know him. No, I'm not one of the disciples. Oh, no, I don't know that man. 3 times Peter said, no, I don't know Jesus. So now Jesus asks him 3 times, do you love me? And now Peter's heart has changed. Peter says, yes, Lord, I love you, and I will follow you. And then Jesus says something a little bit different to Peter. He says, Simon Peter, your life is going to be very hard. He warns him. It's going to be a hard life. But follow me, says Jesus. And so Peter obeys and follows him. Then those disciples are told by Jesus, go back up into the mountains of Galilee and take all the Galileans that believe in me or that aren't quite sure yet and have them come with me. And they go up into the mountains of Galilee, and Jesus meets them there. And do you know there are over 500 eyewitnesses there? There are over 500 men and women there. Some that understand and believe Jesus is the true God, the Son of God. Some that aren't sure yet, but they all get to see them. So now it's a crowd of over 500 eyewitnesses that get to see him. And Jesus says to these 500 plus, I have authority from God. I have the power from God. And I want to tell you something. Go outside of Galilee, outside of Israel, go into all the nations and tell them who I am. Make disciples and baptize them and tell them all that I have taught you. And so now 500 plus eyewitnesses have seen him. Then Jesus says to them, please go back to Galilee and wait for me there. So the disciples and many others leave Galilee. I meant to say go back to Jerusalem. They leave Galilee up here by the sea and they take that trip 50 plus miles down to Jerusalem and they wait for him. And there in Jerusalem others see him and the disciples see him. And he says, I am with you always. And now I want you to go out and teach and shepherd the believers and the sheep. And I am going to give you a comforter or someone to comfort you. And does anybody know what that is? Yeah, it's the Holy Spirit. Jesus gives them his Spirit because he knows he's going away. And that Spirit lives in their heart. That's the same Spirit that lives in our hearts. The ones of us that believe Jesus is God's Son. And they have the Spirit and they go out and they change the world. They tell as many people as they can about Jesus. So now these eyewitnesses are followers of Jesus and telling others and making new followers. And Jesus is with them from the day he rose from the dead, 40 days. And then he rises into heaven. And the disciples actually get to see that. They see him go up and float up into the clouds. And the last thing they see are his feet before they leave and go into the clouds. And Jesus has been in heaven since then. He is sitting right next to God on God's right side. His Holy Spirit comforts us and teaches us and helps us. And those disciples, those eyewitnesses, follow Jesus. And we can do the same. We can follow Jesus, telling others about Jesus. So I hope you guys have a great week. I hope you remember the story of all the eyewitnesses, over 500, that got to see Jesus and touch him and eat with him and walk with him. And hear him and see him and just get to love him. And so tell somebody about Jesus if you can this week. Talk to your mom, talk to your dad, talk to your brothers and your sisters about that baby in your family or those little ones. Tell them about Jesus. Show them who Jesus is. We are not eyewitnesses, but we have the Bible as our witness that we can read and hear and listen to and know and do so that we can tell others about Jesus. We love you guys. We can hardly wait to get back, and we'll see you very soon. Bye.